Hello and welcome to What Now with Anna and Eric. I am Anna. This is
I am Eric, right here on that
yes,
side.
and we are reading through the Bible chronologically in a year, pretty deep into it, and got some fairly normal people talking about the Bible together. And I want to start out with my 3-word summary of the week, and then you can do your 3-word summary.
Get it.
So my 3-word summary is everything is meaningless.
You just see, you pull the, I get that, but I was trying to find the silver lining in that. Mine was God versus human. And I thought you'd like that one because it was like an epic battle. But I think there's God's wisdom and then there's us interpreting it, using it. God versus human was my big takeaway from a lot of this. It's you can have all the wisdom you want, but when you put it into practice, you better do it the right way, because you could definitely go the different direction. But yeah, so that was mine. But yes, everything is meaningless.
Everything is meaningless. That's cool. It's what the cool people say.
But I'm for those at home, we're in a good place in the Bible if you visually look. If you're not an actual Bible person, we got a half on the good side of it. So I think
we are on as of the end. I mean, what we're going through today is day 161.
Man.
So
you have a day 200 celebration just because it's a round number.
Yes, pretty much. I really want to wait. 365 divided by 2.
I got a calculator if you want.
567. Is 167 halfway?
182.5.
Oh.
That's all right.
Yeah. Where did my math go?
Listen.
182. Oh, so we still have several weeks before we're there.
You do have a history on this podcast for numbers not being correct, not being quite accurate.
Especially when it comes to dates.
Yes.
Especially when it comes to dates.
Your calendar numbers. All your other numbers are good, but the calendar
my calendar ones are new. But we hit on a bunch of stuff. So we finished out Solomon. We got in a couple of his books.
Yes.
The Song of Songs, Ecclesiastes, then a little bit of history thrown in there at the end before we got into a bunch of really bad people. With one.
All right, so you're driving the ship. So I'm in for Song of Songs and Ecclesiastes. So if you want to touch on that other boring stuff real quick, then
touch on the boring stuff first. I was hoping to get Song of Songs and Ecclesiastes out of the way so we could get to the other stuff.
All right. Hey.
Or we could go Song of Songs, history, Ecclesiastes.
You drive the ship. You tell me where you want to go.
All right, let's do Song of Songs. I just want to address it and then move on, basically. All right, so rating warning. Song of Songs. If you are one of those people who are like, I'm going to read the Bible with my children.
Yes.
This is one of those harder books to do that with. I was fortunate enough. Well, I would like to think that I was fortunate enough. I did not read Song of Songs, not really on purpose, but I did not read Song of Songs until I was in the latter half of my teenage years. And I remember stumbling upon it and being like, what is this book that is in the middle of the Bible?
My parents hid this book in the middle of the Bible. They hid it from me.
Yeah. It's just kind of like, I was horrified. Although I did end up talking about it with one of my friends, because the thing about the Song of Songs is it's like half rated R, half really hilarious misappropriation of metaphors. And so it's like half the time you're like, I did not need to hear this stuff. And the other half of the time you're like, why would you use this to describe someone? Like, my favorite was reading in NIV, because it made some of the metaphors even more hilarious. So like there's hang on, let me find it really quick. Oh gosh, I hope I actually put it down. Huh, maybe I didn't.
Oh no.
Oh no, this is a one verse that I did not record. Anyways, it's like in chapter 5, Ecclesiastes chapter 5, or Song of Songs chapter 5. And it's basically describing like this, the king is describing his lover. And one of the things he says is he's like, your hair is like a herd of goats and your teeth are like a flock of freshly shorn sheep. And I'm just like, imagine saying that to somebody. Your teeth are like freshly shorn sheep.
But I wrote these down as things that I could use as endearing terms to my wife. Like that, I figure Amy would love to hear that. So you're saying don't? You're saying don't?
I mean, it maybe explain yourself first. Or like he's like, your neck is like a tower. I was like, what does that mean? You have a really long neck? Like, is that attractive? No. So it's like 50-50 on Solomon's. Just like straight up Song of Songs for me was straight up weird. I have a hard time taking it seriously. But I think that the whole premise though can be summed up in this repetitive phrase that does keep coming up, and it is Song of Songs chapter 2 verse 7 is one of the times, promise me, O women of Jerusalem, by the gazelles and wild deer, not to awaken love until the time is right. And it does repeat that throughout. And I did take that as, okay, this is really the summary of what this is. And if we kind of go back to Proverbs, where it talks about in Proverbs, like, just don't go mess around with a bunch of people. Yeah. That's pretty much what the summary of this is.
Well, and that's the way, like, it is, like, when I'm reading it, I look at it and I say, man, like, so we're at different stages of our life, Anna, and
this is very true.
Me being married, like, the memories of courtship was like a huge chapter for, like, just remembering that stuff, like, is a huge thing. Like, you can get so bogged down in just the everyday, but to remember what it was like to actually be courting, to remember the engagement, like that, those verses were huge for me in this one. Is like, yeah, you can just sit there and you can be in a relationship and you can say, oh, like, that's where you can be, or you can take time to really look at this and say, wow, yeah, man, I should remember that stuff. I should remember my feelings or my thoughts in that moment. So yes, it is a little goofy, and it is the metaphors, maybe not, but it is the message of it. And this is where my God versus human side comes in. It's like, Solomon knew all this. Like, he had the wisdom. He wrote this down, and still he had some issues that were going on.
He did. So first of all, I do have to say, considering your opinion, this is one of the benefits of reading the Bible with somebody, is you see different passages differently, which is cool. But what you were just saying of Solomon knew all this, literally when we were reading through this chronologically, the chunk right after Song of Songs, which is all about, enjoy the wife of your youth, don't mess around, etc. And then it says, let me see here. 1 Kings 11, verse 1 through 3. Now King Solomon loved many foreign women, besides Pharaoh's daughter. He married women from Moab, Ammon, Edom, Sidon, and from among the Hittites. The Lord had clearly instructed the people of Israel, you must not marry them because they will turn your hearts to their gods. Yet Solomon insisted on loving them anyways. And here's the kicker. He had 700 wives of royal birth and 300 concubines. You realize that is, all right, we're going to go with my misinformation of dates and how bad I am at calculating these. That's like, if you tried to spend a day with one of your wives / concubines and then like move to the next one the next day, you would get one day with Solomon every 3 years. That's what it breaks down to.
But so that's my whole point of this. Like, I look at this and I say, man, if I could love my wife in this way, like this is incredible. Like, but yeah, to love hundreds upon hundreds and come on, like you
Literally
can't
1,000 women.
yeah. And like, do you think they had access to this? And they're like, excuse me,
Wow, Solomon, you didn't do that for me.
who are you writing about on this one? Who's this knowledge about? Because that's not me.
Picture at one point, because there was one verse in there about, he said something along the lines of, like, this is my favorite, even if I had like 60 wives. Well, he had like 700. But he's like, even if I had 60 wives, you would be my favorite or something like that. And I was like, all right, first of all, favoritism, go back to that. And then second of all, I'm picturing like, because it's a song, right? So I'm picturing Solomon with his favorite wife singing in front of this song in front of a bunch of people. I'm just like, oh, please stop. That's the audience having to go through this.
Well, I had to take reading through this part of the Bible, I had to really take Solomon the person out of it and really look at it for the information that was the words that were in it, because
very much so.
This is where I took everything is God breathed, it's God inspired, this wisdom is coming from God. So yes, his human actions might not have lived up to this standard, but the heart behind what was written is truly going after God's heart and truly being inspired from that wisdom. So to look at it that way, I really liked it. I forgot in the margins that it's written for like friends, she, he, like it's broken up. Like there was some points where I was reading, I'm like, why is he right? Oh yeah, that's from another perspective. That's from a different perspective. I get that. So, but I thought that was really cool when I read through this, that they do have that perspective of the guy's perspective, the woman's perspective, and the friends. I think that's so important to have that side of things, to know that you're not in this alone. Like a lot of times when you look for marital problems, you can cover it up in different ways and you can kind of make it look a certain way, but behind closed doors is different. But you have those people that can speak into it. So I don't know. I was, like I said,
I did think the friends were true to character when they were like, you know, why should we say something about this guy? What makes him so great? I was like, that seems like a friend thing to say. Like, we can clearly see you're really infatuated, but why should we get behind you on this?
No, it was, like I said, it was a good perspective to have. I like that. Like, how is your beloved better than others? Most beautiful of women. Like, what? Like, but it's that question and answer of, okay, explain it to me. Like, if you feel this way, tell me why you feel this way. I don't know. That's kind of when I was reading through it. But yeah, it was, as goofy and as X-rated as it could get. I think the overall theme and the heart behind it is definitely where you want to be. I think that's where you want to stick.
Yeah.
So I was trying to, but yeah. So.
And really, depending on what mood you are in, this book could be something that's very endearing for your relationships, or it could be a great comedic relief in the midst of
we gave struggles. We gave you both.
Yes, both perspectives. I do think this, so I do want to jump into Ecclesiastes next.
Yeah.
So for me, and again, this is from my perspective, I know you said before we started this that you got a lot out of it. For me, I was like reading Ecclesiastes and I was 50-50 again. Like 50% of the time I'm like, all right, Solomon's just acting super depressed right now. And it was somewhat reminiscent of David's more emotional Psalms, where he was just like getting out all of his feelings, basically. And then the other 50% was he was actually saying some really wise stuff. So you kind of have to like take it and go with it. But what really I thought was funny, and again, I took this very comedic route, is when he starts out Ecclesiastes, he basically quote unquote negates all of his other writings. So like he starts out chapter 116 to 17, he's like, I have greater wisdom and knowledge than all of these people, but I learned firsthand that pursuing all of this is like chasing the wind. So he basically negates all of Proverbs with that. Then he goes on and then he says, and then I said to myself, he's talking about basically finding pleasure, different things, and what he was addressing in Song of Songs. And then he says, and I found that this too was meaningless. And I was like, he basically comes right into Ecclesiastes saying, ignore everything I've ever written. It's crap.
Well, but I mean, so maybe I just have some depression that I need to work through with somebody. But like this, so I looked at that and I was like, wow, like he has all this wisdom, and God for sure, I guarantee God put him on a path that he's like, this is, if you follow my calling or my what I want to put in your life, man, it's gonna be great. And how many times in our lives do we like feel this nudge or this calling into something, and then we start taking control of it, we start moving in another direction, and then all of a sudden we're like, man, I'm horrible at this. This is garbage. I can't do this. Why am I doing this? It's like, well, you didn't follow God's path. You didn't see God. You took control and you took it in your direction. And yeah, it might look completely different because it wasn't centered around God and what he's calling into your life. So yeah, I think he's done all these great things with all of this wisdom, and then he's looking at it and he's taking his mistakes and the things that he did or the situations he's caused, and he's like, this is garbage. Well, no, the God stuff isn't garbage. The spin that you took on it might have.
He does really come back to that, as in like, all right, like even in the last chapter, he goes really dissatisfied with everything that's happening, and then he throws in the last line like, but God is great and fear the Lord, and they just like summarize it in the very last sentence of the book. But
he was taking after his dad in that one. He was taking after
just bring it right back right at the end.
Always make sure you throw that at the end.
But I did think like this is like I felt like this was Solomon at his most discontent, and which, you know, I did think, oh, Solomon, you're so drama for most of this. But I also think it goes back to some of the most powerful aspects of the Psalms is being at this point in your life and you're feeling these emotions, and then you read a psalm and you're like, wow, that is exactly how I feel right now. You know, like there's this acknowledgement of what is going on. And how many times, and in so many of these situations where he keeps talking about, and then this happens and life is meaningless, and this happens and life is meaningless. And he even gets into politics at one point and is like, and everybody in politics are horrible and they only do what they want to do for themselves. And I was just like, and this is totally applicable to ourselves, because all of these different aspects of life where we reach at one point and we're like, man, I did all of this work and I earned all this money and it's going to nothing. Or I tried to get through in the courts, because he talks about the courts at one point, and then I just get screwed over and it's for nothing. And so it's just this very, I don't want to say, it is applicable, but it's something that you can really be like, wow, that is exactly how I feel right now.
And that's, so I look at this and you look at what David wrote a lot of the times, like, I can think of this as, man, yes, he has all this wealth, he has all this power, he has all these women, he has all this other stuff that is surrounding him, but it comes down to he's writing this from such an alone place. Like, you have to think like he's writing this from such a dark, alone place, and it comes back to relationships. Like, who do you have in your life? Like, David didn't write a lot of his like sad, dark writings when he had his friends by him or when he was surrounded. He wrote a lot of it when he was alone. And like Solomon in this, he could have all of this, and he's just, once again, Eric, picturing the Bible, he's writing this like by a single candle, like writing this down like by himself. Like, this is the dark places in with all of this stuff. He's like, all of that is meaningless because this is how I feel, or this is what I'm going through. And it's like, who do you have in that relationship that will be there in this place with you to help you through it?
I picture this when he has his 1,000 wives and as many children, and he just has not spent enough time with any of them to have any sort of deep relationship. And so he feels very alone in the midst of a crowd of people because there's
And
too many.
But and that, once again, a theme you'll probably catch a lot, especially in New Testament, like drop everything. Like the relationship side of it and noticing people is where you need to be. Like you can store up all of this stuff and you can have the most wisdom, you can have the most money, you can have the most family, you can, whatever it is. But if you don't invest in that relationship side and truly care and love the people that are around you, then what good is all this? But I really loved, and I actually circled it and I actually wrote it in a journal that I had, but I think it's chapter 3, the time for everything. And like, it just struck me, and I'm like, I've heard that over and over again. Like there's the time for this, but it just really made, like, there is going to be a time for this. And I had to do a little digging because there's a time to love and a time to hate. I'm like, why would you write hate in here? And I'm like, after digging, I'm like, okay, that hate isn't hating people or hating your enemy. The hate is the evil and the stuff you see in this world that just, it drives you to that anger, that hate, to that part of it. But I was like, that just kind of stood out. I'm like, there's a time to hate? Really? Like, who am I hating? But I don't know, that whole first part of chapter 3 was really big for me, that I made sure I made a big note out of that one.
Yeah.
But
so this is just a verse that reminded me of Jesus. Go back to Song of Songs really quick. Chapter 8, verse 6. Place me like a seal over your heart, like a seal on your arm, for love is as strong as death, its jealousy as enduring as the grave. And when I read that, my first thought was, well, I mean, Jesus's love was stronger than death and more enduring than the grave. So that just kind of hit me, and I was like, look, there you go. It's my Jesus verse. But
I'll take it.
So you can take good things out of these 2 books, Songs of Songs and Ecclesiastes.
Like I said, I think, I don't know, I couldn't tell you that these were ones that I keep going back to or that I read a lot of. I couldn't even tell you the last time I read them, but this time reading through them, they both really hit me hard with things that were like, wow, that is speaking right to my heart in this. So yeah. It is, once again, there's a time for everything, and there's a time for Ecclesiastes and Song of Songs.
And speaking of a time for Ecclesiastes and Song of Songs, I think that these 2 books are probably some of my top books of, if you are recommending something to your non-Christian friend to read, maybe don't start with these 2.
So we should start a list.
Or an underage person. I mean,
Song of Songs and Revelations.
This is why we tell people start in the New Testament and then work back from there, because the New Testament gives some very important perspective to all of the Old Testaments.
Yeah, that's for sure.
So historically, we get through Solomon. Solomon goes kaput. His son comes into the world, and we immediately see, all right, this is the 2nd generation after David dies. So God promised David, follow my commands, your children follow my commands, and your descendants will reign forever. It takes technically 1 generation, because Solomon screws it up first. And then his son, David's grandson, loses 10 of the tribes of Israel, like immediately out of the gate. It is that fast. And
and once again, I'm going to go back to broken record Eric saying the same thing over and over again.
I accept you.
It's relationships. I mean, like, if David could have invested in Solomon really the way he should have invested and noticed him and led him the right way as a father, Solomon might have made less mistakes, especially with that wisdom part. But then Solomon spread out, like you said, this kid, how many hours did this kid get throughout?
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, if we add children to the 1,000 wives, how you get like one day for every 4 years with your dad? I don't know.
I mean, could you imagine that though? Like, my dad is the wisest man to ever live, and he has all this wisdom, and now I'm in charge. What'd you learn from your dad?
Nothing.
I got nothing. He wasn't around much.
I read Song of Songs sometimes, but that's about it.
I don't know,
Sometimes Ecclesiastes.
I found Song of Songs like in his drawer underneath some stuff, and I read that once in a while. But yeah, so I mean, but that's what it really comes down to is, yeah, you look at it, how quickly David, somebody who was after God's own heart, was an awesome leader.
Yeah.
Like, his legacy should have carried through that. And so quickly, his legacy, it's this battle to get in good standings and not screw it up from the get. And so, yeah, I thought that was one of those things that, yeah, how quickly
it goes down. It went downhill so fast. Having said that, though, Judah, from what we've read so far, they are better off than Israel. At least when they get to Asa, then they have some really good years. But something that I was like immediately thought, why would you do that? So 10 tribes of Israel split off. Jeroboam, which is funny because Rehoboam is Solomon's son, and then Jeroboam is his rival, who is unrelated but has a very similar name. So that's an interesting.
I thought it made for a great rivalry. I think
it does. It does. Like, if your rival almost has your name, it's just cooler somehow. But it's talking about Jeroboam, 1 Kings 12:28. So on the advice of his counselors, the king made 2 gold calves. And he said to the people, "It's too much trouble for you to worship in Jerusalem. Look, Israel, these are the gods who brought you out of Egypt." And I was like, why? Jeroboam, how could you? And not only like I got what his thought process was, because originally it was like he didn't want Israel to go to Jerusalem to worship God because he was thinking they would like change back over allegiance to Judah. But I was like, why was your first thought, let's make gold calves and then credit them with getting Israel out of Egypt? Like, that is as low as you can go right there, right out of the gate.
And then right after that, pick a favorite and just see how it works out. Pick a favorite and see what happens. You've got your golden calf. Now pick a favorite and just go with it. Yep.
So, it does not go well for Israel. They have a series of really bad kings who make really bad choices and adopt really bad fake gods who usually require human sacrifices, different things like that. So Israel does not go good. Although tribe of Judah, and who Solomon's descendants end up ruling over for a while, because God does kind of still give David some reign through his descendants. But they do get Asa, who's a pretty good guy. He reigns. It is funny to go between the two Kings and Chronicles, because you keep seeing in Israel, it's like, and this person was king during the 22nd reign of Asa, and this person was king during the 33rd reign of Asa, and this person was king during the 43rd reign of Asa, and I'm like, he outlived so many people. But he was faithful to God for most, really all of his life.
It's I think chapter 15 verse 11. It said Asa did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, as his father David had done. And like, I don't know, my take on it, it's like, we know what David did. We know how he led. We know he was after God's own heart. And it's like, so Asa did what was right in the Lord. It doesn't say he was perfect, but he's like, he did what David did. Like, he at least sought God. He at least, like, that's how I picture it. Is why was he good? Did he probably make mistakes as a ruler? Yes, but he it made me see him in the light I saw David of, when I screw up or when I make mistakes, I'm going to try to right it by chasing after God. So at least I kind of saw that characteristic of Asa come out in this. So that was just
it is interesting to see at the end of Asa's life. So you're looking at like First Kings chapter 16, Second Chronicles chapter 16, around the same area. Mm-hmm. But it says that, his heart was dedicated to God for his whole life. But there were a couple things where like while his heart was dedicated to God his whole life, he didn't put God first all the time in his decision making. So like he left some of the idols up. But there are also two instances. The first where he's in war with somebody, and instead of asking God, can you defeat this enemy, he relies on a foreign king to do it. And because of that, he's told he's going to have war for the rest of his life. And then the second is when he died, he ends up with this severe foot disease. And I wish I had written down the verse, but I did not. But basically it says, even though this was very severe, Asa did not ask God to heal it. He relied entirely on his physicians. And so it's kind of like this interesting aspect where when you get to the end of Asa's reign, he stops relying on God and he starts relying on people to solve his problems. And so it's just like this interesting change. Even though his heart still focused on God, he stops relying on God.
Yeah, and that's where I think the power part of it comes in, is that, and you want to take that as okay, how does this apply to me now? Well, if you're like this wealth, power, fame, whatever you think is going to fill you, like at the end, like at what point do you remember that, man, maybe I should go to God with this, or maybe I shouldn't rely on all these other voices that are telling me this thing because it got me to this place. Like, at what point do you remember, wait, God started me out on this path. God got me. I remember how good God is. Why don't I rely on that? And I mean, I can never imagine the amount of power that Solomon had or that Asa had in this situation. But he got so blinded by that power that I think going to God was that whisper was so faint in his life that all of these other voices were so loud that and I think that can go for a lot of what we're doing. Like, what voices are drowning out that whisper of God that's speaking into your life? And that's where I think it gets him. So, and gets a lot of these stories that we hear. Granted, Ahab is not one of those, that I don't think
Ahab is not. So something to look forward to for next week. We're going to get into Elijah, who was a pretty big historical figure who even shows up in Jesus's time later on. Yeah, so that's going to be exciting.
Spoiler that you'll forget about as
it's spoiler, but we have like 100 more days before we get to that, so it should be fine. So next steps, I think for me does come down to, are you relying on God? Like, is he the focus in your life, no matter what's going on around you? Maybe you're at the point in Solomon's life where he's got a lot of stuff, so he's not relying on God because he doesn't feel he has to. Or maybe you're at the point in Solomon's life where you're like, crap, life is meaningless.
All of this gone. I'm done with this.
And if that's the case, you still need to rely on God. So keep that in mind. And I think that's my big next step.
No, and I think that's the filter, and that's my big next step. It's the relation that kept coming up to me over and over. And if you started with a list of people in your life and God was first, and then if every time you looked at the people in your life and said, okay, is this drawing me closer to God and helping me be a better person and be better in my relationship with God, or is this person pulling me farther away from it? I think that gives you, and there might be some tough names on that list that realization of, man, that is not helping me, and that might lead to some tougher things. But I think in the long run, really committing yourself to that relationship with God and then committing yourself to these relationships that bring you closer to God is huge. And I think can fend off a lot of the bad mistakes or bad roads that you can go on when you get in those positions of power or calm or however you want to look at it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I like your next step. I think that's I think God first, and then figure out where everybody else fits in the
Yes.
in the mix.
So yeah, something to look forward to. And this went pretty well, I feel like, for what I was expecting.
See, we didn't dive into it. We had more to talk about. There was more.
Salem is just such a weird character. Like he hits both extremes.
Yeah, he was all about it. I guess when you're the wisest guy, you kind of go with it, and you just.
Yeah, I don't know. So thank you for listening to What Now with Ann and Eric. I always enjoy this. This is fun. I'm Anna.
I love it. It's a great time. The highlight of my week, Anna, showing up to hang out with you.
Great. So we will talk to you next week on What Now with Ann and Eric, and rely on God as you are going through this week.
There you go.
Bye.
Love it. Have a great week, everybody.